Good morning, everyone. We're glad you could join us for the 2020 BASF Precision Decision webinar on herbicide resistance management. I'm Sean Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM that you can hear every day at 4:30 Eastern. And I'll be moderating our discussion today. Later, we'll be hearing from three industry-leading experts as they discuss recent trends in herbicide resistance management in Canada, the use of precision technology against herbicide resistance, and the importance of best management practices such as herbicide layering. We're going to hear today from Dr. Brianne Tideman. She's a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Also Warren Bills. He's the Senior Commercialization Manager and Regional Lead for North America with arvio Digital Farming Solutions. I think he has the longest title at BASF. Also Andrew Reed. He's the Technical Service Specialist with BASF Canada. As you can see, our experts come from a wide range of backgrounds and will be offering a variety of perspectives during today's webinar. This is the third year, actually, that we've covered this topic, but there's always something new to discuss as management strategies continue to evolve with resistant weed species that emerge in Canada each year. Today, our experts are going to tell us where they think precision technology fits as we adapt to meet these growing weed populations. More specifically, our experts are going to cover topics such as managing herbicide resistance with precision technology spraying. They'll also discuss how to prevent resistance through proper spray and application practices. They'll take a look at changes with resistant weeds and resistance management practices. And finally, they'll review trusted best management practices such as herbicide layering. Okay, we'd like to end the webinar today with time to answer your questions. The Q&A is always one of the most valuable parts of any of these webinars we do with BASF. To submit a question, just type it in the chat box and we'll have one of our resistant management experts answer them during the Q&A period, which will be at the back end, probably just 15 minutes or more. Also, for those of you who are certified crop advisors or certified crop science consultants, you'll receive one CCA CCSC credit for attending the webinar. Just make sure you entered your CCA number or check the box for CCSC when you signed in. If you registered at an earlier date and forgot to provide your CCA number or indicate that you are a CCSC, no problem. Just be sure to contact Ag Solutions Customer Care. Okay, before we dive into the discussion today, let's give a brief overview of today's topic. Things haven't changed when it comes to how high Canada ranks among countries with herbicide resistance weeds. We still have the third largest population in the world, and according to several sources, that number is currently actually around 77, which I think a lot of producers are, and some agronomists are unaware of. As the population increases, so does the risk of resistant weeds to reduce the crop yield, quality, and ultimately the producer's bottom line. In 2016, Sask Wheat estimated that herbicide resistance cost growers approximately $1.1 to $1.5 billion each year. That's why it's crucial to keep investigating how we can manage this problem in the most effective way, which is exactly why we're here today. Our first speaker is Dr. Brianne Tideman. She's a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. With a PhD from the University of Alberta, Brianne has been working in her current role since 2016 with a focus on herbicide-resistant weeds and integrated weed management. Her immersion in agriculture goes even further back to growing up on a grain farm near Wilkie, Saskatchewan. Brianne, you're up.
So I wanted to start out by giving a bit of a background in terms of what herbicide-resistant weeds we're actually dealing with in Canada. But I wanted to start first by looking at herbicide resistance globally. So herbicide resistance has been increasing with the first herbicide-resistant weed discovered in the 1950s. If we can just move to the next slide, you'll see the graph of how fast those resistant weeds are increasing. I'm just waiting for the slides here. So currently, there we go. Currently, our global number of resistant weed cases is at 512 unique resistant cases. So that is a species by a herbicide group. A month ago when I first pulled the graph for this presentation, it was 511 resistant weed species or unique resistant cases. So it is increasing still, and it is increasing quickly. The United States is still first in terms of resistant weeds, with Australia being second, and Canada comes in third. So if we look more closely at the Canadian situation, if we move to the next slide, Canada has 68 resistant weed cases right now. So slightly different number than Sean said. It's just how they're categorized basically. The point of it is there's a lot in Canada, and that number is continuing to increase as well. Now, every time we look at these graphs, I get the question, it looks like it's plateauing at the top, but if you look back through the history, it looks like it's plateaued a number of times, and then it's just kept on going up. So we do expect that number to continue increasing as we continue selection with our herbicides in crops. So what weeds are actually resistant? I've broken this into Western and Eastern Canada. In Western Canada, our #1 resistant weed species is wild oat. In terms of what kinds of resistance we do have Group 1 resistance, Group 2 resistance, Group 1 and 2 resistance, as well as Group 8 resistance. Now, concerns with that, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more in a second, is that we start running out of options that work for managing wild oats in crop. The second weed that I want to talk about is kochia. Now, depending where you are, you may be arguing with me right now that kochia is not the #1 weed. Can we just pull up all the pictures on this slide, please? There's our kochia. So kochia, of course, is Group 2 resistance, and one of the major issues with it is that it has developed glyphosate resistance. It is our only glyphosate-resistant weed that is established in Western Canada, and glyphosate resistance is increasing quickly. It went from about 5% in 2012 to about 50% in Alberta in 2017, so a 5-year span of 45% increase in glyphosate resistance. The bottom left picture there that you can see is cleavers. It's one that is also becoming a challenge for a number of producers, both in canola, because it's hard to get it out of canola in your canola seed, but also in pulse crops, because we do have Group 2 resistant cleavers. And this is increasing more in Alberta than it is in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, and we're not entirely sure why, if that's just sheerly the crops that are grown or what's happening there. But cleavers are definitely becoming a problem. Bottom right-hand picture is foxtails. So we do have both Group 1 and Group 2 resistant foxtails in the prairies, and primarily green foxtail, although Manitoba is also dealing with yellow foxtail resistant populations as well. The top right picture is actually water hemp. So water hemp has only to date been found in Manitoba in Western Canada. The problem being that when it comes in, it is coming in as glyphosate resistant. So how is water hemp getting here? There's confirmed cases of moving through equipment. There's cases where it's believed it's moved through the river. And there are cases confirmed where it has been dropped by waterfowl. So it can be airborne, which is one of the big concerns. We move to Eastern Canada resistant weeds. There's more glyphosate resistance in Eastern Canada. So these species that I've listed here are all glyphosate resistant. So we've got common and giant ragweed, water hemp, as well as Canada fleabane. Although they are glyphosate resistant, they are also multiple resistant in a number of cases, which again makes management very difficult. I'm not from Eastern Canada, so I'm not as familiar with these weeds, aside from knowing that they are very much a problem for Eastern Canadian growers. If we move to the next slide, I wanted to talk quickly about upcoming threats. So water hemp, as I said, is already in Eastern Canada, and in particular in Ontario. It is found in Manitoba, but it is not truly established, and we really don't want it to establish. It has not to date been found in Saskatchewan or Alberta, but we do suggest that producers keep an eye out for it, particularly because it can be moved by birds such as duck and geese, which gives it quite a good avenue to move into our regions. Palmer amaranth is one where if you've talked to any producers from the United States, you have probably heard about this weed. It's another pigweed species, produces a ton of seeds, and has a ridiculous amount of herbicide resistance. It is glyphosate resistant. There are populations in the U.S. resistant to 5 different herbicide groups. There's 2 populations like that, each resistant to 5 different herbicide groups, not the same 5 herbicide groups. So a vast array of resistance in that weed. Eastern Canada, if you look at Ontario on a map where they've mapped where Palmer amaranth is, Ontario is essentially surrounded by Palmer amaranth containing states. And in Western Canada, it has moved as far west as the Dakotas and Montana. So it's getting far closer than certainly I would like it to be. Multiple resistance is another problem that we're really concerned about. Multiple resistance is already occurring, but it's continuing to increase. And as multiple resistance increase, your product options become more and more limited. So if we take wild oats as an example, if you have group 1 and group 2 resistant wild oats, and it's resistant across all of the families, the subgroup families within that herbicide group, basically your control options in a number of crops is restricted to pre-emergent herbicides and in some cases only suppression registered herbicides. So it makes your control options much more limited. One of those options that is registered for control pre would be triolate. The concern being that we have confirmed triolate resistance in the past in central Alberta, and so your control options quickly become limited. Glyphosate resistance, obviously already occurring in the east. We do have glyphosate-resistant kochia in the west. We expect to see more glyphosate resistance. Now, one of the most at-risk weeds, based on some modeling done by Hugh Becky in about 2010, first was kochia, and then we had glyphosate-resistant kochia by 2012. So there's some confidence behind the predictions that he was giving, unfortunately. The second weed that was most at risk was wild oats. And for a long time we've been talking about the fact that this is at risk, but I think producers mostly thought we were just trying to scare them and it was some kind of mythical unicorn type thing that didn't actually exist. About a month ago, glyphosate-resistant wild oats was confirmed in Australia. So it is no longer this mythical figure that has never occurred in the world. We have actually seen glyphosate-resistant wild oats. It is something that we are significantly concerned about, as well as other glyphosate-resistant weeds such as cleavers, for example. And the more we continue to rely on glyphosate, the more likely it is that we will find these resistant biotypes. So what do we do about it? If we move to the next slide, the biggest key word that I can ever give you when it comes to managing herbicide-resistant weeds is diversify. But I'm not saying to just diversify your crop rotation or your herbicides, both of which are good tactics, but also look at diversifying your management techniques. So dig into that IWM toolbox or into the IWM research, but also think outside of the box. So think about clipping of weed seed heads and preventing viable weed seeds from being produced. Or look at harvest weed seed control is a great example of producers thinking outside the box. So all of the harvest weed seed control methods, whether that's the Harrington seed destructor or narrow windrow burning or anything like that, that's being done in Australia, those are all techniques that came from producers trying to find a new way of managing their weeds. So these ideas are not ones that some scientist came up with in their lab or at their computer. This is producers in the field looking at a problem and saying, here's a way that I might be able to deal with this. So the two biggest things that I can ever tell you about managing resistance is diversify as much as you can in as many ways as you can and think outside the box. The last slide that I want to put up here is just some of my contact information. I'm active on Twitter. My email address is there. If you ever want to talk weeds or ask a weed question, please feel free to reach out.
Our next presenter is Warren Bills. He's going to be talking about how proper use of precision technology, apps, and equipment can lead us to more effective resistance management. Warren is the North American commercial lead for Arvio, digital farming solutions powered by BASF. He brings 15 years of experience in digital farming technology and business strategies with both startups and global corporations. I'll pass things over to you, Warren. Your turn.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Sean. Brianne as well. Thank you for the background around this topic. So happy to bring a virtual digital view into the resistance topic today. It wouldn't be right of me not to start off showing a bit of a timeline here on the next slide that talks about how data, I'll try not to use that word too often, but how data is really starting to get very specific for us in today's agricultural environment. So I can only imagine, probably 10, 15 years ago we were talking about weed resistance on a country level, and then we started to talk about it more on a regional level. Now in the last 5 years we're talking about it at farm level. Really today, I think we have the capabilities through sensors and sorts of devices to talk about things at a field level. But as we expand our minds into the future, the opportunity here is really to think about managing resistance at a field level. And so all of this data is getting connected around the world for us to use at our advantage. And one of the tools that we've put in the hands of growers and agronomists around the world, shown on the next slide, is on a smartphone, and it's a scouting app that basically helps to identify and diagnose, what weeds species that you may have in your field. And so you can imagine the value of having a crowd doing this around the globe, when you start to potentially pick up on different trends of resistance and resistant management. So sometimes it's not just about choosing the right chemistries, but also knowing exactly what problems you have in the field. And so this is just one real good example of a sensor that everyone has available for them today to help with resistance and documentation. Where it gets a little bit more exciting, and what I wanted to bring today into this webinar on the next slide, is when we can start to put these sensors on application equipment, on sprayers. And so announced actually, I think it was around 2 years ago at the Agritechnica event in Hanover, and then even just this past fall, arvio is working on a collaborative effort with Bosch and other manufacturers to build a smart sprayer. And so the idea around the smart sprayer is taking that plant-specific data and that plant-specific identification on the go, and then sending a signal back to the sprayer to decide what active ingredient may be best suited to control the species that was identified. So if you can imagine some of the species that Brianne had mentioned, whether it's wild oats or water hemp or something, and we know that there's certain active ingredients used at the right dosage that can actually do a great job at controlling those resistant weeds. So potentially moving away from some of these blanket applications of herbicides and moving into more plant-specific treatments is where we see the future. And this will really help with resistant management. And so sensors mounted on booms combined with intelligence inside the cab of the tractor to choose the right active ingredient, maybe even by injection, is the future of smart spraying. And so that's something that we're proud of working on with Bosch. As shown on the next slide, our role with that at BASF is really around that intelligence and that detection and the agronomy and the formulation and the application technology. So we may find opportunities to use different rates and different droplet sizes of active ingredients as well that can serve the right purpose. And then, of course, the spraying system is there in place. So I'm excited to bring this into market. We've had field trials underway for the last 2 seasons. We have more field trials in North America, ramped up a little bit here this year. I think, at risk of being recorded here to make a prediction on video, but the anticipation is we will have some of these great smart spraying solutions in market by 2023. And so that's really not that far away when you consider it. We're in the 20s, and so just on the next slide here, I can conclude and open to questions, but I wanted to leave you with an example. Some work that we're doing in Brazil where they do have big resistant issues on their large fields as well. So something that's really unique about Canada in comparison to other parts of the world, such as Europe, is we do have large fields and we cover these fields with large equipment. Brazil is the same way. And they've had resistance problems, glyphosate resistant problems for years, and it's starting to become a big issue. So what we've done at arvio is we've partnered with some applicators, we've partnered with some high-resolution imagery providers, and essentially what we're doing is we're mapping where these resistant weeds are after the pre-seed burn down, and then we're following up with a treatment of glufosinate in this case to control the resistance only in these areas. And so we're moving away from blanket application, and we're seeing a savings of greater than 61% on average across many regions of Brazil right now. So this may be something as a process that could be applicable to parts of Canada, parts of the US. It's really not, when you think about it, that difficult to implement if you've got all the right digital tools in place. And the sprayers are ready and the drones are ready. and we're ready to support you as well. So I think with that, on the next slide, again, excited to be part in the market as Arvio. You'll see us out at different events across Canada, and maybe have met some of our great teams. So thanks, Sean, thanks, Brianne, and looking forward to the Q&A later on.
Next up is Andrew Reed, Technical Service Specialist at BASF Canada, with a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy and a Master's degree in Weed Science. Andrew's role has focused on the agronomics surrounding crop protection products in the industry. He works with marketing and research on long-term herbicide projects and with in-field technical reps to support and develop the herbicide portfolio. Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Good morning, everyone. So what I wanted to do today is kind of pull together everything that we've talked about already. Like, we have resistance present. There's some really cool digital tools coming. How can we pull this all together today? So if we go to my first slide, one thing I really want to key in on is that there is so many potential tools that are coming or are already here. Warren, I'm going to hold you to that 2023 comment. You've got it on video now, so it's part of the public domain. So we've got some really cool digital tools coming. We've got some really neat mechanical tools that are already here. Brianne, I'm really glad you mentioned the Harrington Seed Destructor. I know you've been working on that for, I want to say, about 5 years now that you've been looking at that in research. Really, really promising. And there's a ton of new research that is coming. This isn't a completely bleak future that we've got with herbicide resistance, but I still have to highlight that while there's some really cool tools coming, you know, not all of them are available right now. Some may not be available for several years, and there is a cost associated with some of these. I don't want to throw a cost out for the Harrington Seed Destructor. I know it's not necessarily a cheap implement to put on. So that's something that has to be considered, and that's something that we always get the question on is, as a producer, someone will ask, how much is this going to cost me? And that has to be balanced out when we're looking at this. So one thing that I really want to do is touch on some of the things that we can do today to manage resistance. Maybe not on an unlimited budget, but we still want to make sure we highlight some of the things that we can do. So if we go to the next slide, one of the key things to remember is that herbicide resistance management, so much of this comes down to good agronomics. So I'm glad to hear the crop herbicide rotation is absolutely essential. Some of this comes down to just good planning, good management. Warren, one of the things that you mentioned that actually gets me really excited is a lot of that digital mapping and identification technology that we already have today. Because one of the most important things when it comes to managing weeds is understanding what is there and what you have in your field and how prevalent it actually is. So if you have an opportunity to go out, scout your fields, or have a drone go out and scout it for you before and after application, and understanding how bad that resistance actually is, that is a hugely powerful tool for producers to utilize. One of the other things that I really have to highlight, and you're going to hear me say this multiple times, is integration of all practices where possible. Brianne mentioned thinking outside the box. You can't really do just one thing and assume that that's going to solve all your problems. That's what we've done with herbicides for years, and unfortunately, look at where that's gotten us in some situations. So I wanted to go through a couple of examples here that actually have very little to do with herbicides, but are great for herbicide resistance management. So if we go to the next slide, one thing that we don't talk enough about in some areas is silage crops. And I always hear farmers groan at me when I say silage, because a lot of the cereal guys say, you know what, I don't have cattle, that's not a fit in my operation, but it's a great example if that option is available to you to help manage resistance. So this is actually a picture that was provided to me by Bob Blackshaw, who's now retired, formerly with Ag Canada. He did a trip down to Australia, and this producer actually had such a bad resistance problem that he literally could not grow a crop. So what he was doing was he was trying to seed something in, but he was just going in, cutting it, and chopping it for silage, and he was hoping that after about maybe 8 to 10 years of that he would have reduced his seed bank population, that he'd actually be able to grow a crop again. So if you have that option available to you, and it doesn't even have to be you that has livestock, maybe a neighbor, maybe that's something you can look at selling is chopping and selling that silage to someone else in the area. Great potential tool to help manage herbicide resistance. So if we go to the next slide, looking at a different research example. So this was some work that was done actually before my time, and again, this was provided to me by Dr. Blackshaw, where they were looking at a lot of different cultural practices beyond herbicides. So they were looking at, okay, what does a rotation versus a monocrop do? What happens if we use a more competitive variety, so a taller variety? What happens if we up our seeding rates? You will notice here that they were using cut rates of herbicides, and I would not recommend that for herbicide resistance management. See Brianne shaking her head here rather vehemently, but that is something, again, it's good as an example, so we can look at the cultural aspect of it. And then they did this over several years, and then examined the cumulative treatment effects over time. So if we go to the next slide, which actually shows some of the results, they looked specifically at wild oat biomass, and this was after 5 years. So they've done this for several years in a row, looking at continuous barley versus a crop rotation, the more competitive cultivar, increasing seeding rates. And one thing that you'll notice, and this is where integrated weed management can be really, really cool, you'll notice that, okay, we went from a short to a tall variety, okay, reduced our biomass basically by half, a 2 times reduction. Increasing our seeding rate, reduced it by 3 times. Combining those two factors together, and this is where 1 plus 1 sometimes equals 5 or more, actually reduced it by about 8 times. And then by putting all 3 factors together, they actually saw a 70 times reduction in wild oat biomass. So this is actually really good at hopefully driving home the point that you can't necessarily just do one thing, but what all can we incorporate? Because once you start integrating all those little techniques together, that's really where integrated weed management will start to shine. Now, one thing that's important here, and if we go to the next slide, herbicides are still part of integrated weed management. And I got to be honest here, we cannot prevent herbicide resistance forever. The weed science community back in the 90s, everyone stood up and said, glyphosate resistance is never going to happen. It took us too long to find it to integrate into varieties to make Roundup Ready crops. Lo and behold, in 1995, the first glyphosate-resistant case was found in Australia. It always seems to be the breeding ground for glyphosate resistance. I'm not sure what they're doing down there. And like Brianne mentioned, they now have glyphosate-resistant wild oats. So nature bats last. The weeds will eventually win. And even if you're doing everything right, okay, what's your neighbor doing? What's the guy 10 miles down the road doing? Brianne mentioned that some of these weed seeds can move by wind movement or on either livestock or even on waterfowl. So even if you're doing everything right, sometimes through no fault of your own, it can show up in your operation. And once you have it, it doesn't go away. So the Group 8 resistant wild oats is actually a phenomenal example of that. So one thing, we used a lot of Group 8s 15, 20 years ago, but we got to the more Group 1s and Group 2 options come in, so we moved away from that. Now with multiple resistant wild oats, growers are going back to those Group 8 chemistries, and they're actually finding out it's not like they disappeared. They're actually still there, even if you hadn't used that chemistry for the last 15 or 20 years. So it's something that we can't just close our eyes and hope that it's going to go away on us. So if we go to the next slide, one thing that I want to highlight that's fairly important to keep in mind is, okay, what should I be, if I want to do the right thing, I'm utilizing my herbicides, should I be alternating modes of action? Should I be tank mixing modes of action? The moral of the story is both is better than doing nothing. Where we've run into issues in the past is where producers will utilize a single mode of action year over year over year until it breaks, and then they'll switch to a different mode of action and then that's the only option they have left. Then they continue to use that until, again, it also breaks. And then we run into a situation where we have multiple resistance. By switching up our modes of action, by either alternating them, rotating our herbicide modes of action, or tank mixing them together where possible, helps increase the longevity of those modes of action, giving us better activity over our entire crop rotation. The other thing to keep in mind, and if we go to the next slide, is that we have to keep in mind which modes of action we're utilizing. So we know that there are certain modes of action that are higher risk. So the Group 1s and the Group 2s are a very high risk for selecting for herbicide resistance. That being said, they're still some of the most effective tools, and we're not saying that you shouldn't use them. We just have to pick our spots where we need to make sure we don't have any other option, or we want to make sure that we're only utilizing them when we have to. Now, you'll notice group 9s are listed as low risk. Doesn't mean that there's zero risk. It can still happen if we overuse them, but looking at some of our other lower risk herbicides, the group 14s and 15s are relatively new in Western Canada. They've been utilized in other parts of the world for a long time, but they're a good option to look at in a herbicide rotation to help, again, manage resistance, hopefully before it happens. Now, if we go to the next slide, I've talked a bit about multiple modes of action, mixing it up, making sure you're using more than more than one active ingredient in that tank. Now, when I say multiple modes of action, I actually really mean multiple modes of effective action. So a common example, Western Canada, so Liberty and Centurion, very common tank mix on Invigor hybrids. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and the question I was asked is this truly multiple modes of effective action on grasses or broadleaves? It's actually only multiple modes of effective action on grasses, because you've got two different products in that tank working on those grass weeds. It's not actually multiple modes of action on broadleaves, because the only thing that's working on it is the glufosinate. So something that we have to keep in mind is what weeds are we targeting, what products are we looking at utilizing, and making sure that we're picking products that have overlapping spectrums of activity. For something to truly be multiple modes of effective action, at least two active ingredients must have activity on that target weed. And if we go to the next slide, we actually have a little bit of a live, I'm going to go put air quotes here. This is actually a live plant demonstration we did at some of our knowledge harvest events a couple of years ago. This is looking at layering different herbicides together, both pre-seed or pre-emerge, followed by in-crop. So the tray on the left, this actually had heat complete, so it's a combination 14 and 15, and then it was followed up, this is a soybean example, so Ingenia plus glyphosate, so then you've got group 9s and group 4s. That's 4 different modes of action that are actually working on those weeds of choice. The one on the right-hand side, actually, same thing, heat complete pre-seed, but followed up by Viper and glyphosate, so then you've got 2, 6, and 9 post-emergent. So that's 5 modes of action that you're utilizing. So one thing that's important to note is that we're actually using multiple modes of effective action because we have overlapping spectrums of activity on all those target weeds. But the one thing you'll notice is that on the one on the right-hand side seems to be doing a little bit better on the volunteer canola, which is up at the very top of the tray, as the one on the left isn't working as well. So if you're targeting canola, you may be looking at the herbicide program on the right because you've got better overlapping activity. So one thing that's incredibly important to remember is making sure that you're picking your herbicide programs based on the problem weeds that you have in your operation. So if we go to the last slide, and I just kind of want to wrap it up here because I've touched on a lot of different things here. The take-home message that I really want to leave everyone with is there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. We are past the days where it's a application on, like a single application or, spray and forget it. We can't do that anymore. Successful resistance management relies on utilizing every single tool you've got in your toolbox. Warren, I love the conversation about the see and spray stuff because that might actually open up some new technologies to use or new active ingredients where our struggle is we have to make sure it's safe on a crop. Maybe eventually we can get to the point where we can utilize an active ingredient that may not be safe if you were to spray it over top of that crop, but if we can direct that application away from the crop, all of a sudden that opens up new technologies or new ways for us to go. The other thing to keep in mind with this is that this, like I said, not a one-size-fits-all strategy. Your strategy is going to change field by field, farm to farm, and maybe eventually plant by plant once we get to that point where our technology can keep up with that. And I'll be honest, every single company, this is our mythical unicorn, Brianne, every single company is looking for a new mode of action. It's not easy. It's very expensive, and it's taking longer. 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was relatively easy to bring a new mode of action or a new active ingredient into the marketplace. The most common number I've heard quoted over the last year is about $250 million just to bring one new molecule to the marketplace, and it takes at least 10 years of development. I know BASF, we will screen 300,000 different molecules every single year, and we might get one out of that shows activity somewhere, not just from herbicides, that's fungicides, insecticides, other potential options as well. So it takes a long time, it takes a lot of work, it is not easy. And the last thing I really want to hit here, proper resistance management is every single person's problem in this industry. Everyone in the industry, whether you're a chem rep, whether you're a public researcher like Bran, whether you're on the digital side, whether you're an agronomist, a retailer, a grower, every single person should be looking in the mirror and asking themselves the question, what am I doing to manage resistance either in my operation or to help my customers, help my growers, help the public? What am I doing to help manage resistance? Because if you're not, you're already behind the 8 ball and you're potentially going to make yourself a bigger headache in the future. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and Sean, I'll turn it back over to you if you wanted to lead the Q&A session.
This is agriculture, so we get to say it depends. So I think, Sean, let's be real. There's green on brown smart spraying solutions in market, and so the likelihood of savings to that same level is probably going to be, my assumption here is less than the pre-seed and post-harvest applications. But I think it's a given that if you've done a good job with integrated weed management and all the different strategies that have been suggested on today's call, there's definitely bare ground out there that doesn't need to have a chemistry applied on it on all of our spray passes. And so I think the savings will range field by field, grower by grower, and that it's going to depend on green technology or green on brown. But great question.
So multiple modes of effective action doesn't mean that we won't see resistance to the multiple effective modes of action, but it's much harder to find that one unique individual, that unicorn again, if you will, that has resistance to both of those herbicide groups at the same time. Now again, it's not to say it can't happen, particularly if resistance is metabolism based. It's a little bit easier, for lack of another word, to find that plant that has those resistant traits. But if you're using two different effective modes of action, the plant has to be adapted to resist both of them at the same time in order to actually survive, set seed, and continue the population. So because it's a numbers game, if you look at probability theory or the probability math, which I hated in high school, so I'm not going to go into it in detail, but if you multiply the possibilities of those numbers together to find it in the same species, that number becomes exponentially bigger. So it's just that much harder to find.
Even if you have some resistant biotypes there, as long as you're looking at and utilizing other modes of action and utilizing other strategies to manage it, because odds are you will still have susceptible biotypes of that weed in that field. So you're still getting some activity out of that herbicide, and actually Bran made a really good comment about metabolism-based resistance. There are some examples where we've seen a metabolism-based resistance, if you're combining with a different mode of action, can actually overcome that resistant biotype. And I'm not going to go in depth into all the examples, but you can still get some activity out of that herbicide. So we would still encourage you to utilize that mode of action in that field, as long as you're utilizing different strategies as well.
So basically a question on, is it better to tank mix or is it better to do the herbicide layering strategy? It can be really hard to find multiple effective modes of action to incorporate for every single weed in your field. But as long as you're using multiple modes of effective action, you are winning. Because you understand the effective mode of action concept. Because it's not easy, and it's not easy to do for all of your problem weeds in all of your fields.
That is an excellent practical question, and I'm not going to have a great answer for you because the answer will vary from grower to grower and field to field. Probably the best way that I can answer it is you really have to look at your field, your operation, your problem weeds, and understand and know what you can do and where you can bend. Like one thing I mentioned is that we have to utilize all these different strategies. If we want to think outside the box on this one, maybe you can still utilize that bundling program if they're offering some different modes of action. Perennial crops are a great option for managing weeds and resistance. You put a perennial crop in there, your best weed management is the crop itself. Because it's there, it's out competing most of the weeds before they even come out of the ground. So that actually gives you more options beyond herbicides themselves. So again, this is no one size fits all answer. You really have to look at what does my operation look like and how best can I balance all of those out between programs and between different modes of action and what I'm growing. So unfortunately, it's not something that I can just give a really general answer to. It's really going to have to come down to your own operation.
If you think back even to the first slide I showed around the granularity and resolution of data, today's current imagery that's somewhat freely available is around that 10-meter pixel resolution. So just imagine looking down and seeing a 10-meter by 10-meter square. That's the resolution we can detect. Of course, we can go finer, but then it becomes cost prohibitive. So to answer the question, using multiple images throughout the growing season, basically what you're looking for is you're looking to detect patterns, and it's a pattern change detection. The tools are there. There's nothing limiting it. Of course, the caveat is as soon as the crop is at a growth stage above the weeds, then you're detecting crop and not weeds. And so that's something where ground truthing and boots on the ground are going to help validate.
Sean, that's just not a nice question. I don't know that I have a great answer for it, to be completely honest. Certainly systemic chemicals like how glyphosate works is going to be a better option for controlling perennials pre-harvest. That's why glyphosate can be very effective at that timing. The whole reason being that how glyphosate moves in the plant is in the phloem, which means it moves source to sink. And in the wintertime for perennials, the sink, where the plant is putting its energy, is its root system. And so when it's putting its sugars and its energies into the root system, it puts the glyphosate there as well, and that's how you actually get control of the root system.
Now, this is something that I'm going to look at the situation a little bit differently, is instead of saying, well, here's a product that you should be spraying on top of it, it's what else within my rotation can I integrate to manage kochia? And instead of me saying, given the chem answer saying, spray this product X, Y, or Z over top, it's, okay, maybe this year I had a bit of a problem, and unfortunately that's not going to be good for my crop this year. What can I do differently? It's not an easy answer. It's not an easy conversation, because we all love, and this is going to be a very general comment, but most people love the easy route where we can say, hey, this product doesn't work, let's go to this one, it's going to do the job you need. Unfortunately, we need to get away from that mindset. We really need to look at what other options, what other practices can we incorporate into weed management like kochia, which is a huge problem weed in the southern prairies. Is it cutting it? Is it looking at different crops? I don't have a good answer for you. And that's unfortunately what the weed science, where weed science is going, is that there is no easy answer anymore. We're looking for other modes of action. There are some options that are out there that you can incorporate in terms of different modes of action, different herbicides that do have good efficacy in kochia. But, and this is a very big but, we need to make sure that we manage them well because we are going to eventually burn them out.
Basically, no-till has actually been relatively positive in terms of weed management. Weed seeds need good soil contact in order for them to be able to emerge. And no-till, because of the residue and because they're falling on the surface, it limits their ability to have good seed soil contact. The other thing is that some weeds need a flash of light and then to be buried to start germinating. Some need to be all in the dark, and the tillage disturbance allows some of those weeds to start emerging. Generally, if you're in a no-till system, stick to your no-till system, otherwise you're going to run into actually more issues.
Excellent. Well, I think, unfortunately, we are out of time for questions today. We understand that some people have been having troubles hearing Sean on the broadcast, so I'm going to be doing the closing remarks. So with that, thank you so much for joining the webinar today. We also want to thank those of you who added to the conversation with your questions for our experts. And finally, we appreciate our guests for sharing their knowledge, experience, and expertise on herbicide resistance management, and we hope you found their presentations informative. Our goal is to provide you with information that helps move your operation forward. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's webinar and would appreciate if you could take a minute to answer the brief survey question you'll see when you exit the webinar. And once again, for those of you who are certified crop advisors or certified crop science consultants, you are eligible to receive 1 CCA or CCSC credit for attending this webinar as long as you've provided your information. If you registered at an earlier date and forgot to provide your CCA, CCSC information, please contact Ag Solutions Customer Care. For access to our previous webinars on herbicide resistance management and other relevant topics, you can visit agsolutions.ca/webinar. For any additional questions that weren't answered today, talk to your trusted Ag Solutions representative or call Ag Solutions Customer Care at 1-877-371-2273 to learn more. Thank you once again for attending, and we wish you all the best in the coming season. Take care, everyone.